Well, hello everybody. Welcome back to the Auto Bravado channel. Today, I'm here with this 2005 Ford Escape V6 with all-wheel drive. Let's get into the review. Yes, this is the first generation Ford Escape, which came out all the way back in the 2000 model year. I have to tell you about the Ford-Mazda merger, which started all the way back in 1974 and ended in 2015. So, Mazda and Ford started to share parts across different platforms, and this is no exception. The Mazda Tribune is built on the same platform as the first generation Escape. And I truly believe the first generation of the Escape was so successful, it lasted from 2000 to 2008, selling over 1 million units. Say, this specific example is almost at 175,000 miles on the clock, and it really begs the question, is it such a bad thing that Ford and Mazda built this car together? Automotive purists would say, oh, this is such a bad thing, you would never buy a car like this. But when it really comes down to it, the quality, the price, and even the reliability of this Escape is unbelievable. So I want to talk about the styling of this vehicle. This is the first generation, obviously. There's the second generation and the third generation as of current. And I have to tell you, this boxy design really sits with me quite well. I mean, this is what an SUV should be like. Rounded curves, it's supposed to be rugged. This is an off-roader SUV. It should look like one. And again, I want to cement the idea that this is a capable off-roader. It's all-wheel drive, it has a V6, plenty of power. And again, I want to point out this isn't exactly a super expensive off-roader, and that's apparent because this is somewhat of a basic all-wheel drive system. I mean, there's no locking differentials. It just sends all the power to all four wheels at, I would say, a 50-50 split. So, you know, a relatively basic all-wheel drive system, but it's better than having two-wheel drive. So you'll take that in a car like this. Again, Ford has used plastic bumpers. Some might say for cheapness, to cheap out, but in reality, you get this dirty, it'll clean right up. As if it's paint, you won't be so lucky. And again, I want to talk about the styling of these SUVs in the early 2000s. You know, cars then were totally different. I mean, I just have to point out the pinstripe that Ford has installed on all of these Escapes that goes all the way from the front to the back of the car. And in the Ranger review we did, it had the exact same paint code and the exact same color pinstripe. So really interesting to see that. And it's really cool to see that Ford has integrated the Ford badge into the pinstripe. Just, you know, a little Easter egg you just don't see on cars like this anymore. I love seeing that Ford sticker badge on there. And I have to say, when it all comes down to it, and you're buying this car, considering the price point, it all comes down to durability, reliability, and longevity. These cars can last years and years. This one's sitting at 172,000 miles 15 years later. All right, so before we move on to the inside of the Escape, I have to point out the key. This key has been used on pretty much all Ford products, from the Focus to the Mustang, all the way up to the Ford GT. Alright, so we're going to get inside the interior of the Escape. Alright, so upon entrance, I have to point out this is a really high driving position considering the height of the car. The seats are relatively high, which is somewhat interesting, but I mean, headroom's good, legroom is good. I mean, there's a lot of room down by my feet, so, you know, you could sit back in this car for a long time and you wouldn't be asking for space. Now, this is the XLT trim, and I just really love beige interiors. That's personally my thing, and that there's no exception with this. This might be an early 2000s Ford product, but the seats are nice leather and somewhat vinyl. The steering wheel is leather. The dashboard is a nice soft touch material. You know, everything in here, other than the center control stack, you know, is cheap. I mean, they've really done a good job with this interior 15 years ago. Again, I just have to point out, this is obviously an all-wheel drive car, and it's interesting, Ford has stuck a little four-wheel drive placard on the center control stack, which is really interesting because this is considered an all-wheel drive car, meaning it's all-wheel drive all the time, as where four-wheel drive generally means you have locking and unlocking differentials, which allow you to drive in two-wheel drive mode or have all the wheels drive the car. And another thing I have to point out is the radio system that Ford has installed here. They installed this on all of the light duty and Ford F-Series pickup trucks in the early 90s and mid-2000s. And one thing that I really like about this, and especially Ford likes about this, is that it's cost effective. They stuck this specific system in the Escape, the Focus, the Ford trucks. I mean, you know, it's really cost effective. And if it breaks, you have plentiful parts to find to replace anything on here. However, the same does not go for the climate control buttons and dials. It's obviously a really simple system, but it's really interesting to see that they've chosen this sort of setup. You know, it works relatively well. You have 4 speeds for your fan. It works. I have to point out, this is a fully loaded, top-of-the-line version of the Escape, and it comes with power locks, power windows, 1 automatic window that goes down for the driver. You have power mirrors. I mean, you've got pretty much everything in here, even a dimming gauge cluster, which I really like. This is considered a mid-size SUV, so you obviously have all your amenities. You have storage cubby down here, USB charging, as well as a cigarette lighter up here. You have your cup holders as well, and a sort of leather-wrapped parking brake lever, which is really nice because it totally adds to the details of this car, as well as the center console, which you can fit many things in here, and it's obviously wrapped in a really nice and soft vinyl material. Alright, so we're getting into the passenger side of the Ford Escape, and just sat down. One thing I have to point out, everything that you get on this side, you have on this side. You have your nice comfortable chair. You obviously have your color-matched glove box with plenty of room for extra belongings. You have a side door cubby as well as one down here, door-mounted speaker. And it's blatantly obvious. I have to point out the door cards along here. So the owner tells me that he saw the fabric coming off, so he decided to rip it off and replace it with car glue, interior upholstery glue. So he put it on there, and one hot day, it was 120 degrees out, and it started to melt the glue off, so he just decided to rip them off on all 4 corners of each door. Again, the features keep coming. You have a one-touch power sunroof that we will not be opening right now because it is raining. We have a rear dome light, front dome light. I mean, you even have a little place for your sunglasses and whatnot. But I'll tell you, having these little extra things in your interior can really make or break buying a car like this. Before I move on to the back of the Escape, I have to point out Ford has used a sort of cloth and vinyl and leather combo for their front seats as well as rear seats, which is really interesting because, you know, this car has always been about, you know, luxury, especially in this trim level, and they've also sort of mixed together a blend of durability and luxury. So really nice to see that they've done this. And another thing I have to point out, Ford has given you a little cutout for when you want to turn on the car or take the keys out. You slide your hand in there, stick the key in, and you have plenty of room for your knuckles to touch the dashboard. Really nice to see that they've included this in here. Before we get into the rear seats of the Escape, I just have to point out again that this car is 15 years old. This is the XLT trim, which means this car gets leather all around. I just have to point out these leather seats are in absolutely amazing condition. I imagine you won't find an Escape with seats like this ever again. Alright, so we're in the back seats of the Escape, and one thing I have to point out, there is quite a bit of loss of headroom as well as front leg room, and that's quite apparent considering the front seats are tilted further back than you would expect, but other than that, it's relatively comfortable. And another thing I just have to point out, the speakers back here, you don't normally see this, but they've sort of gone with a honeycomb design on these rear speakers back here. It's just really cool to see that they've sort of added a little cool touch. We also have full electronic windows. They aren't automatic. They also have installed little cutouts for you to open and close the door, which also act as a little cubby for smaller items. You also have a rear grab handle with cutouts for your hand to fit into, as well as a dimmable roof-mounted dome light. You obviously have a fold-out, sort of oscillating rear-facing cup holders, as well as a little place to store papers and fragile items. So, you know, with stuff like this, you know, these are the things you're going to use, and I'm so glad that Ford has added these in the car as a standard feature. Alright, so we're moving on to the back of the Ford Escape XLT, and I have to point out the usability and the cargo space back here are really tremendous. I mean, you see a lot of crossovers and SUVs now with giant rear-facing pillars, I mean, small quarter windows. I mean, with this car, they've really gotten a lot of space out of the rear. I have to point out, these are nicely carpeted. You know, you wouldn't think it considering this is an early 2000s Ford product, but I mean, this carpet is in such good condition. It feels nice still to this day. Again, I just have to point out, a lot of people don't use cargo covers nowadays, but the fact that this one is still in the condition it's in, still working, you can put it up anytime you want. It does sag a little, but I guarantee you, you won't find one in this condition again, ever. Other than that, this is relatively basic for as far as this goes in the back here. So you obviously have your functionality, your usability, and your rugged durability. So really nice to see that. I have to point out these rear grab handles that Ford's installed on the back of this lift back. So in the early 2000s, you know, Ford was just figuring out the whole ergonomic side of everything, you know, making it easy to use, everything like that. I'm just really glad to see that they've paid attention to something like that. One thing before I go, I just have to point out the obvious imprint where you're able to select to open up the door or the glass. And obviously we can open up the door from the left side, and now we close it. And now we can obviously open up the latch for the glass. Now it's unlocked, so now all we have to do is pull on the installed grab handle and we pull up. This is for if you need to go somewhere in a pinch, just throw it in so you don't have to open up the tailgate. This is really smart thinking. I wish cars of today had this. All right, so now we're under the hood of the Ford Escape with the optional top of the line 3-liter V6. It develops 200 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 193 pound-feet at 4,850 RPM. And especially with a car like this, it has the optional 4-wheel drive system. You need that torque, and you obviously need that power. And just to tell you, it's paired with a 4-speed single-clutch automatic transmission. And I'll tell you, you can put it in the first or second gear lockout, and you can dig into that mud, which is exactly what you'll be doing, considering you have the all-wheel drive package. So now I want to get on to fuel economy, and most of you might think, okay, well, this is all-wheel drive. Fuel economy is going to be absolutely rough here. And I have to tell you, that's not the case. It receives 18 miles per gallon city, 22 miles per gallon, just over 20 miles per gallon combined. That's hard to believe considering the weight of this vehicle, which sits at 3,482 pounds. It's really a marvel. The fact that they've been able to get that fuel economy, this performance out of it, it's amazing. Something really cool I really want to point out is the fact that this is a transversely mounted V6. You could get this as a front-wheel drive layout, or you could get it as the all-wheel drive layout, which this is. And I have to point out that you have the one side of the valve cover over here all ready to see, and with these spark plugs ready to be taken out or put back in, you obviously have your electronic throttle body here ready to go. It's just really cool to see all this stuff out in the open. You don't see this on cars today. Well, we've taken an in-depth look at this 2005 Ford Escape XLT with all-wheel drive. Now it's time to get it out on the road for a drive. All right, so we're about to get inside the Escape here, take it on a drive, unlock it right now, hop in, seatbelt on. Remember, it's all-wheel drive, so we'll see how it handles. Here we go, we're about to start it up. There we go, starts up every time, no hesitation. And here we are again. I have to point out, we're sitting at 172,822 miles. Problem-free mileage 15 years later. All right, let's take it out. So this is actually quite amazing. I can actually feel which wheel is biting more than the other. I mean, there might be something wrong with the differentials in the back or something up front, but I can definitely feel the all-wheel drive system working quite well, actually. All right, so we're heading out here onto the road. It's a really interesting turn signal sound. And one thing I have to point out again is that the Rev Counter has really blocky letters, and that's really apparent because, I mean, you can barely see the red line probably in the video, but it's 6,500 RPM. So, you know, I mean, that's a common red line for, you know, V6s like this, and especially a lot of cars today. But you know, it's really hard to see, and that's really interesting. All right, so we're heading into a corner now, and I can really feel that. Ooh, that actually, wow, that hooked up pretty good. that was not full throttle. I mean, that was about half throttle, but it weights up really well. And what's really surprising, and I'm actually astonished by this, the amount of body roll. I mean, you can feel initial body roll, but it really tightens up after you load it into the corner. I'm actually really surprised by that. We have the second gear lockout. It's in second gear right now, and we're going to use the lockout. We're going to roll into it slowly. Here we go. Wow, that's unbelievable. That, oh my gosh. You know, it's not fast, but something I really like. I felt the cam totally cross over at about 4,000, I'd say, you know, 4,200 RPM, and that's really, really awesome to see that. I was not even close to full throttle. This thing had a little bit more in it. And again, I really have to point out the power loss, the torque loss is really apparent up at, you know, speed. I mean, it really takes a lot to get going, to get moving and stuff. I mean, it's all-wheel drive. And again, you know, for a car that's supposed to be totally about off-road, I mean, it's not exactly off-road totally capable. I mean, 3,400 pounds. I mean, you know, approaching 3,500 pounds. It's not as underpowered as you might think, and that's especially considering the torque curve. It comes on so low. That's the thing I like about this. You know, it's not a super high performance V6, but you know, where the torque comes in, I mean, you can really feel it down low. You know, there's a really good amount of mid-range torque and power, and that's really apparent from the poll we just did. So. Another thing that's really funny, I imagine the motor will definitely outlast the car. I can totally feel the engine mounts wearing away. You know, this might be a big SUV, you know, medium-sized SUV that doesn't exactly have that much performance. You know, it's an all-wheel drive system, of everything like that. I mean, you can use this car just like that. I mean, you know, every little thing about this car I find really interesting. An early 2000s Ford product, you just don't see stuff like this. And it's kind of a sad thing that these cars are being taken off the road, scrapped for junk. And it's just really cool to see this one in the condition it's in, still being able to run and run and run. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. I had an absolute blast driving this car, especially in the condition it's in. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you guys all again very soon in the next video. See ya.